Hello everyone, we have to discuss about that. Dum. If further development has been the significant and the escalations in the process of the economic globalizations, usually associated with the advance of the new liberalism. पूरे राम सॉरी मेरी मौली माफ कर दो मेरे फोन नहीं मानता लेकिन moreover a particular form of the capitalism and development has gained global and the ascendancy and since the 1918 usually the doubled and the new liberalism. And what have been the chief and the consequences and of the Trump? Usually doubled and the neoliberalism and what has been the chief consequences of the Trump and of the neoliberalism. A further development has been other significant acceleration in the process of the economic globalizations and usually associated Capitalism and the new liberalism. Capitalism of the world. The origins of the capitalism can be traced and back to the 17th century and 18th centuries. Europe and development in the predominantly and feudal societies, and the federalism and was the characterized by the agrarians based on the based productions and geared to the need of landeds and states, and fix the social and the hierarchicals and the rigid pattern of the obligations and duties capitalist and the parties and the initially took root in the form of the commercial agriculture, and that was oriented towards the market and increasingly and repeat on the wages labor instead of the bonded and serfs, and the market and the mechanism the heart of the emerging capitalist and the system, and certainly intensified and the pressure for technologies and innovation, and the brought and about other substantial and the expansions in productive capacities. This was reflected in the agricultural revolutions, and which saw the ensures and of the overgrazes and common land, and the increased and use of the fertilizer and the scientific methods of productions. And nevertheless, and the most significant development in the history of the capitalism come with the industrial revolutions, and which the developed from the mid 18th century onwards, first in the UK and but the soon in the USA and across much of Europe, and industrialization entirely and transformed and society through the advent of the mechanism and often factory based the forms of the production, the increasingly use of the divisions and of the labor, and the gradual shift of the population and from the land to the expandings and towards and cities. In the process, industrializations and massively expanded the productive and capacities of the capitalism, and enabling industrial capitalism to emerge and by the mid and 19th century as the dominated socio-economic and systems worldwide. The development of the industrials and capitalism and also marked a key phase in the evolutions of the world and economic, in that is resulted in the exports of capitals and from the Europe to the North America and South America and Asia, also leading to the sharpenings and of the divisions of the labor between the states and the between different regions of the world, and in thus ways is the discussed and later the foundations of the modern global capitalism and were laid during the late 19th century. However, the capitalism and does not the constitute and just either single a socio-economic form, and but other variety of the socio-economic forms, and Brown 1995 Hall and the Soskis and 2001, and it is the possible to identify and three types of the capitalism system: enterprise and capitalism, and social capitalism, and state capitalism. Enterprises capitalism is widely seen, and the particularly in the Anglo-Americans and world as the pure and capitalism, and that is as and the ideals and towards which others the capitalism and are the inevitably and down and freedman and 1962, and the home of the enterprises capitalism is the USA, and the despite its yearly post 1945 and the affiliations and with the Kia nations and social the democracy the UK, and nevertheless the principles of the even east inner price and capitalism and have been the extended and for the viewed the Anglo-American and world the through the impact of the economic globalizations, and see page 94, and which has gone the head in hand and with the advance of the marketalizations and enterprises capitalism is based on the ideas of the of the classical economics, and such as the Adam Smith and the David Richard and 1772 and 1823, and updated in the form of the new liberalism by the moderns. Adam Smith 1723 and 19. Scottish economist and the philosophers and usually seen as the founder of the dismal science and economic. After holding the chairs and of the logic and then the morals philosophy at the Glasgow and universities, Smith becomes the tutors and to the duck of the book Leach and which the enables and him to the visit France and the Genevas and to develop his economic theories and the theory of the moral and the sentimented in 1759 and the developed other theory of the motivation and the tie to the reconciles and humans the self and the interestedness and with the unregulated social orders. Smith and the most and the famous work and the wealth of the nations in 1776 was the first systematic attempt to explain the workings and of the economic in market terms and emphasizing and the importance of the divisions of the labor and the although he is often the view as a free market theorist and Smith was the nevertheless and aware of the limitations of the market. Theorists such as the Austrians and the economist and the political philosopher Friedrich von Hayek and the 1899 and 1992 and the Miltons and Friedman and it's the central features and is faith in the market and is other self-regulating mechanism or as the Adam Smith and put it and the invisibles and violences of the vultures and the bravers or the bakers and that we the expect our the dinner and but from theirs regards and to theirs the our interest in the USA. Such the free market principle have helped to keep the public ownerships to the minimums and the ensures and that the welfare provisions and operates as the little more than other safety net. US businesses and are the typically profit driven and other premiums is placed on high productivity and labor flexible. हाँ जाइए ये सानिया flexibilities that trade union are the usually weak and the reflecting the fears and that लिए ये जहाँ तक लिए ये मैं और फिर नहीं जानता हूँ reflecting the fear and that the strong level organizations and are and the obstacles and to the profit maximizations. The emphasis on the growth and the enterprises of these forms of the capitalism and the step in parts and form the fact and that the productive and wealth is owned and largely by the financial institutions such as the insurances and companies and pensions funds and that the demand other high rates and of the returns on theirs and investment and the undoubtables. बात ढाक ले नीचे बैठा ले बाय अरे उते छोड़िए तू बाहर की जहाँ पे जगह आएगी जहाँ पे वो भाई the undoubtable economic power of the US and the beer and testamented and to the vigors and of the enterprises capitalism and despite the clear evidence of the relative economic decline whereas and the USA and accounted for the half of the world and the manufacturings and the outputs in the 1945 and this had the fallen to less than 1/5 and by the 2007 the average productivity of the USA is still higher than the Germany or the Japan and the USA clearly enjoy the naturals advantages and that the enable and it's to the benefits and from the application of the market principle and notability and the continental and wide domestic market are the wealth of the naturals and resources and other rudely Ruggly industrialism and the populars and cultures and seen other frontiers ideology enterprises and the capitalists also have the serious disadvantages and however the perhaps the most significant of thus in the tendency and towards the wide and material inequality and the social fragmentations and this is the demonstrated and in the USA and by the levels of the absolute and poverty and that are not the found and for example in Europe and in the groups of the poorly and the educated and the socially dependence under class social capitalism Social capitalism reforms two other forms of the capitalism and that took and root in much of the Central and the Western Europe and Germany is its the natures and home and but the principles of the social and capitalism and were the adopted in the various form in the Austria and in Austria's and the Benelux and countries and the Sweden's France and much of the Scandinavia's and when the Kurzbergen and 1995 and this the economic form and heavily on the flexibles and the pragmatics ideas of the economists and such as the Friedrich List in 1789 and 1846 and the influential theorist of the economic nationalism and the central theme of this the capitalist and model is the ideas of the social market and that is in the attempt and to marry the disciplines of market and competitions and with the need and for the social cohesion and the solidarity and this is the reflected in and the emphasis and on the long term investment and rather than the short terms and profitability and business organization in what has been called Rhine and the Alphines and capitalism also different from the Anglo-American capitalism in that it is the based on the social partnerships and trade the unions and enjoy the representation through the works and council and the participated in the annual round of wage and negotiations and that are the usually industries and wide and this the relationships is the underpins and why the comprehensive and well the funded and welfares the provisions and there the provided worker and others the vulnerable and groups and with the social guarantees and the strength of the social capitalism and where the clearly and the demonstrated and by the economic miracles and that the transformated and war the tone and the Germany into the Europe and leading the economic power and by the 1960 and high and the stable levels of the capitals investment and together with other strong emphasis on the education and training particularly in the vocations and the craft skills and enables Germany to achieve the highest level of the productivity in Europe. However, the virtues of the social capitalism are by no the means and the universally and accepted and one of its the drawbacks is that becomes because and its places are the heavy strength on the consultations and the negotiations and consensus and it tends to lead to the inflexibilities and make it the difficult and for the business and to adapt to market condition and for example economic globalization and intensified and competitions and from the East Asias and Latin America and the elsewhere and further the strength and are the imposed by the relatively high levels of the social expenditure required to the maintain and high qualities and welfares the provisions and thus the push up the taxes and so the burdens and both the employers and employees and whereas and the supporters of the social capitalism and the insist and that the socials and the markets are the intrinsically and linkage it is the criticism and argues that the social capitalism is the nothing and more than other centradics and the times in terms of state capitalism. The term and the state and capitalism and have been the defined in other numbers of the ways and for the instant and Trotsky writes and the used it is it to the highlighted the tendency of the Soviet and the Union under the Stalins and to use the rights and the control of the productive and powers to approach the working class in other manners and similar to capitalist and the society and however in its the modern usage and the state capitalism is more and the commonly used to the describe and capitalism economic in which the state plays are the crucial directive roles and thus are the often non-rebellious capitalism and societies and whole and the societies and in 2001 and distinguished and between the liberal market economic in which the firms and coordinated their the activities on the basis of the competitive and market arrangement and the coordination market economic and which depended heavily on the non-market age and some aspected of the social capitalism and could be found in the post 1945 Japan and this was the models and that the East and the Southeast Asians tigers and the early and adapted and it has the influences the emergent Chinese capitalism and as well as in some the respected and Russian capitalism the distributions the distinctive and character of the state capitalism and is its emphasis on the cooperative and long terms and relationship, and for which the reason and it is the sometimes and called the collective capitalism, and this allow and the economic and to be the directed and not by and the impartial price. Global political economic released view. Realist economic theory is the firmly rooted in and the sometimes and seen as the wings and the synonyms and with the economic nationalism or the mercantilism and the mercantilism and tax the state and to be the most significant economic actors, highlighting the extent to the which economic relations and are the determined by the political powers. In this, the views and market are not the natural and but the exist within other social contact largely shaped by the exercise of the state power, as the state system is the anarchical. The global economic trend and to be the characterized and by the conflict and as the state and compared and with the each others, and for the power and wealth in as a zero sum and games the classics and the merchandised, and the strategy is to be the world and up other state and wealth and power and the prestige and by the developing other forevers and trading balance and through the producing goods and for the export while keeping the import and low the chief device for the achievings, and this is the protectionism and the defensive merchandise mercantilism, and is the designed to the protect the in fact the industries and the weaker economic and from the unfair and competitive competition and from the stronger economic, and while the aggressive and mercantilism and the aims to the strengthen the nationals and economics in order to the provided are the basis for the expansionism and the war and the global economic, and has thus been fashioned and by the interested and of the most powerful students sometimes and through the non-colonizations and but also the through and free trade arrangement, and that force the weaker student to open up and there the market, and for the some realist is the stable and world economic and required the existence of the single dominated power as the implied and by the hegemonic stabilities and theories. Liberal view. Liberal economic theory is based on the belief and that the individuals as the rationalists and self the interested and created on the utilities and maximizers are the key economic actors, and utility and maximizers act to achieve the greatest and pleasures and over plane calculated in the terms of the material and the consumptions. In this right and business are and the important means of the organizings and productions and thus of the generating wealth in the line and with the deepers. Liberals believe in balance or the harmony and among the competing and forms forces the key ideas of the economic liberalism, and is then and the unregulated and market economic and tends the towards and long run and the equilibriums and the price mechanism, the invisibles and hand of the market and bring the supply and demand into lines with one another. And from the perspective of the classical liberal political economic, and this the implies other policy of laissez-faire in which the state and lives the economic and along the market and is the left and to the manage itself. Economic exchanges view the market is therefore other positive some and the game in that the greater efficiency produce the economics and growth. Economic produce the economic growth and the benefits and everyone, and the global economic is thus the characterized and by the cooperations and as the trading and others the economic relationship and promise to the brings and mutual benefits and the generals prosperities, and this the further implies other positive views of the economic globalization, which is seen as the trump and of the market and over the irrationals and the impediment and such as the national borders and such the thinkings and has been the taken and furthest and by the new liberalism and since the keenness and however and the alternatives and the traditions of the liberal political economic has the recognition that the markets and can fail or are the imperfect and in which case and they needs to be the managed and or the regulated on a national global level criticals and the approach and to the economic has been the dominated by the Marxism and which the portrayed and capitalism as other system of the class and the exploitations and the trades and social class and as the key economics factors actors and as the class and the elegies and are taken to be the more powerful than the national and the loyalties and political economics and always has and the international dimensions in the Marxist view in the modern economic and the circumstances the interested of the capitalist class and or the argues and are the increasingly and the identified and with those of the transnational corporations and which are the widely and seen as the more powerful than the national government economist and having the primacy and over the politics capitalism and therefore has the enhanced and globalizing tendency and the unceasing and desires to the expand regardless of national borders and the legal the globals and economics nevertheless characterized and by the conflict streamings from the oppressive natures of the capitalism and the systems itself and for the sums and the Marxism and this is the expressed through the imperialism and the desires to source the raw materials and cheap labors and however the some new Marxism and from the Bell and Bellerstein have interpreted and the global capitalization as the world systems and which is the structured and by and the exploitatives and the relationship between the so-called and core the areas and the peripherals and ones and the specifically and between the transnational corporation and the developing world and other have that adopted a the new gram season approach that the strength and the role of the hegemony highlighting the extent to which in the economic power and the political power operated in the tandem. Mechanism is built and through and what has been called the relation markets an example of this of the pattern of the interlocking and share the overships that ensure that there is other close relationship and between the industry and the finance in Japan and the imbalancing balances Japanese and firms to the adapt and strategies and based on the long terms and investment rather than the short space or the media term profit and firm themselves and provide the social core of the life in the members of the firm and in other way and that does not occurs in the USA or even the social market and traditionally expected the lifetimes in employment pension and social the protections and the access to the leisures and recreationals and opportunities and particular streets and is placed on the team works and the buildings and up of the collective and the identity and which has been under the pinned by the relatively and the narrow incomes and the differentials and between the managers and workers the final element in this the economic mix is the government although East Asian and the level of the public spending and the taxation are the relatively and how and low by the international guidings standard and often below the 30% of the GNP and the state has played a vital role in the guidings in investment research and the trading decisions the models and here's was the undoubtedly the Ministry of the International Trade and the Ministry Meeting and which the overshows the Japanese economic miracles and in the post 1945 period the Japanese version of the state capitalism and appears to be the highly and the successful in the early post 1945 period accountings and for the Japan stabilities to recover from the war times and the devastations and to becomes the second largest economic in the world and helping to explain the rise of the Asian tiger South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore and so on. However, the Japan slowdowns and during the 1919 the low lost decades and the Asian financial crisis of 1997 and cast other dark shadow and over the state capitalism, highlighting it is the inflexibilities and its the failures and to the response and to the ever changing and pressures of the global economic. Moreover, the price had to be the paid and for the Japan economics and success in terms of the heavy demand and on the workers and there's the families and long hours and the highly undisciplinary and working the condition and can means that the individuals and is shifted in the work becomes the centrifuge of exercise. In thus the circumstances, China has become the standard and barriers for the state capitalism in 1980 and having the becomes the second largest economic in the world in 2010 and China's mixture of the bargainings, capitalism and the Stalinist and the politicals and control and has been the remarkably and effective in the deliverings and situated and the economic growth and benefits and from other hug and supply of the cheap labor and massive the investment in the economic infrastructures. Russia conversions and to the state and capitalism occurs in the aftermath of the choose and the disclosures of the 1919 and ban the shock and the treatment market reforms were the introduced under the Boris and the Eltsins and from the 1919 and onwards the Vladimir and the Putin expected into the result and state power in both the political and the economical life and in part in India in orders to the breast power and back from the so-called and the oligarchs and newly rich the business and marginate and who had been and the criticism and for the shipowings of watch and out of the countries and for the continue a key aspect of the Putin economic strategy was to the explore and the Russia's waste the energy resource and both other motor for the economic growth and to be the give and the Russia's greater leverage over neighboring and state and indeed and over the much of the Europe's. The strength of the state capitalism and the derived and from its the pragmatism and the flexibility and strong the student being becomes to the pursues and economic priorities and with the single mindedness and even the 8 times and worth led that the liberals democracies and cannot match and measure the infrastructural project and economic infrastructures and can thus be the purchase and more the easily and the wages of the capital and the currencies and market have other reduced impact on the economic decision making. Some has been speculated and that what has been the cold and the Beijing's consequences and the Ramo and 2004 and maybe in the process of the displacing the Washington and the consequences and the however the major weakness of the state and the capitalism in the contradictions and between the economic and the liberalism and the non-liberalism liberals and the political arrangement and for example the critics have the argument that the China's and version of the state and the capitalism and based on the blend of the market economic and one party communist rule is the ultimately and the unsustainable in that are the windings of the economic freedom and must the sooner on the latter greater generated pressures and for other windings of the political freedom and Hutton's and 2007 state the capitalism and will only the constitutes other viable alternative to Western and the based on capitalism models and if it is the possible and for the market economic and to the purpose and in the long terms in the absent of the political liberalizations. A Chinese economic model focus on What is the source of the China and remarkable economic sources since the introduction of the market reforms and in the late of the 1917 is there and such other things other capitalism and with the Chinese characterized in Chinese economics modern has other numbers of the clear features and first with the populations of the 1.3 billions and with other historically and the press dated shift in the peoples and from the countryside and to the expanding and the towards and cities and the particularly on the eastern coast China has the benefits and from other seemingly and the inhabitants and supply of the cheap labors second in the commons and with the Japans and the Asian tigers and before it the China has the adopted and the export led growth the strategy and founded on the manufacturing industry and the goal of the becoming the workshop of the world and the third are the high savings rations means that the unlike the USA and the many Western economics and investment in China and the largely come from the international sources and this not only the suggestion that the Chinese banking system is not the robust and then the those of the USA, the UK and the other Western states but it is also the allowing China to lend the massively about such the lendings keep China currency and keep cheap in other relation to the US dollars and thereby and the boostings and the competitiveness of the Chinese export. Fourth, economic success in the underpinned by the interventionism and the government and which is the among other things. अरे राम रे